Welcome to the Honest to Goodness podcast,
where we promise to be more than honest
and point to His goodness. Hey guys, welcome back to the Honest to Goodness podcast. It's me, Nicole, today.
Yes.
I am so excited.
I am too.
We typically have I know that you and Rebecca have really good conversations, and me and Rebecca also have really good conversations. But I'm so glad to be able to sit down with you. We always joke around about Nicole, how she is like the best question master. She always comes up with like on the spot questions that me and Rebecca are really slow to. So that is like one of your gifts, is you are such a question master.
Well, thank you.
You're
I think
welcome.
you and Rebecca are wonderful at answering them in depth.
We do know how to do that. So I'm excited. We, Nicole and I were talking before we started recording of just like where we felt like, about topics that we felt had resonated with us and topics that we felt like were something that we wanted to be uncomfortable answering. Right? I mean, Nicole texted me this morning. She's like, I think we should talk about this topic. And I was like, she goes, I know that it might be uncomfortable. And I was like, absolutely. It is super uncomfortable. But I think it's so important. All these conversations that we have together and everything that we talk about here on the podcast, and even in our like little, discussions on text thread or whatever, like they're all just so important to have. And so I want to dive into the topic of beauty and how beauty is talked about in the Bible. And then even just in the Christian faith, just the concept of beauty and how I think we've gotten like how some of the lies that we've believed about beauty in general. So I know this about you because obviously we've been friends for a really long time. 6 years. Our 6-year anniversary just came up.
Our Facebook friend-iversary.
We did. We were literally talking I think last week when we got together to record about, we're like, how long have we been friends for? And one just side note about Nicole was we first met 6 years ago. I was hosting a bloggers get together because I used to be really into blogging. And I had created a group in Champaign County for bloggers to get together and for us to just like have some sort of group. And Nicole came, and I remember latching on to Nicole like I have never latched on to somebody before. And I was like, right away, I'm like, my deep called to her deep, and her deep called to my deep. And I just felt this instant connection with you. And I think it was probably like not even 6 months later, it probably was like 4 months later, I found out I was pregnant. And she was like, can I host a baby shower for you? And I was like, wait, what? I at that point I had this is my 4th baby, and I just met this girl, and she asked if she could host one for me, and she did. And it was you are an event planner in your next life.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I felt the same way. I mean, I kind of stalked you on Instagram and emailed you. I remember you were so kind to respond to me. And so I was just eating up any opportunity I could have to meet you, to get to know you. And so, yes, our deep called to each other's deep. Yeah. And look at us now.
I remember just like literally like pouring my whole heart and soul out to you the first night we were out. And I was like, oh man, I hope that wasn't too much. But that just goes to show you that God knows the connections that we need, and he will put those together. And it's just, it's always beautiful. You know what I mean? It's like, those are always so, it's like you can feel it in your being when you were meant to connect with that certain person. So anyway, so earlier this year, actually it was November of last year, you went on a retreat with Rebecca. And one of the exercises that Rebecca had you guys do while you were together was, what did she call it? Pillow talk? Or yes. No, that's not right.
Yeah, well,
pillow talk?
Well,
that's
pillow talk's a little something different. But yes, so basically every lady had a chance to sit in the middle of the circle on a pillow, and then every other retreat member that was there got to just speak words over them, and it was just such a life-giving exercise.
So tell me, like, explain to the listeners what that might have, like, what does it mean to speak words over somebody?
Yeah. So I think it can mean several things: words of encouragement, also prophetic words, what you see for them in their future. If you do have like a vision for them, or basically, I guess in general, just speaking life into them. Yeah.
One of the things that our church practices, just as a side note, is this exercise that says, when I look at you, I see. And so like it kind of dumbs it down for people that have never done something like this before, where we all have like a first impression of somebody, right? Like, and a lot of times we don't share those first impressions, and I mean good first impressions, like where we see somebody and we're like, oh wow, she looks really good in that outfit, or oh wow, that's her color, or oh, where did she get those earrings? But we a lot of times keep those things to ourselves. And so one thing that I've learned after going to my church for the last 14 years was you can speak over somebody or speak into somebody by just saying, hey, when I look at you, I see that you carry this really special presence about you. Like, you seem really confident. You seem really put together. Like, you seem like whatever. And so it just kind of takes the pressure off of like, oh my gosh, I have to have this special, thing that I speak. So anyway, so you guys did this exercise, came to your turn to sit. Were you one of the last people to go?
I think I was the last person.
I
was trying to avoid sitting in the middle.
And you guys at this point, for reference, had been doing this for how long? Like 6 hours or something?
Yes, crazy. We had to split it into 2 nights, I think. So I was the very, very last person.
And so as you're sitting there, so Rebecca's obviously not here, but this is sort of her story. So Rebecca, I'm sorry if I butcher this, but she says that she was sitting there and she's like, I know Nicole so well. What am I going to speak over her? And what am I going to say that I haven't already said to her? And then the Lord basically showed her Esther, right? And can you tell us in your own words what she said to you in this prophetic word that she gave to you, that she spoke over you, and what did it mean to you?
Well, it's kind of crazy because my older sister, I would say a few months before this retreat, she was like, when I see you, I see Esther. Wow. And so I had never told anyone that. And so I'm in the middle of this circle and Rebecca's like, I just feel like God's giving me the word that you're a modern day Esther. And then since then, which is really crazy, I've had several people speak the same thing over me. When I like write my little devos online, I recently had a lady that was like, you are an Esther. And she obviously doesn't know any of this. And so it's just wild, how the Holy Spirit works and moves in people. Yeah.
Well, if you guys don't know the story of Esther, it's a book in the Old Testament. And it's a really powerful short book, actually. So it's one of those that you don't feel like goes on and on and on. But it's really powerful because Esther is this beautiful, beautiful woman, right? Like she is somebody that gains favor in the king's eyes because of her beauty, right? And it's because of that beauty that she is placed in front of him, that she gains favor with the king. And she essentially, over the course of her time in her position with the king, she uses her voice to change the trajectory of her entire people group, right? I mean, that's just like the Cliff Notes version. So yeah, if we really encourage you guys to go and read the Book of Esther because it is super powerful. But I love that it emphasizes her beauty. And Nicole, you are somebody that is obviously so incredibly beautiful. Like when people look at you, that's the first thing that they see. I have oftentimes talked to people who are close friends of mine. They're like, I've never seen somebody so beautiful in person, or like, I've never been around somebody. I'm intimidated by her beauty. And, which I think is so, I obviously think you're one of the most beautiful people I know, but now that I know you, it's like I'm like, she's beautiful on the inside though. Like that's what's most important, to me. But, and so having that word of beauty spoken over you so often, I'm sure it was something that you've heard since you were a little girl. How has that impacted the way that you have I guess how has that impacted your life? Like how do you feel when you hear that word, or like just in general, when you hear that, what does it make you feel or think?
That's a really good question, Tessa. I think initially it's discomfort because I don't identify myself like that, especially right now, ladies, if you're watching this. I'm about beautiful. 30 pounds more than I normally am. But
and she's also growing a human.
Yes, I am growing a human. Very blessed. But you're right. So ever since I was little, I remember, growing up in the church, people would be like, "You're so cute." Mm-hmm. And then it would turn to like, "You're so pretty." And then, almost adopting that as an identity in a lot of ways, and not for the glory of God. Mm-hmm. So definitely went through a season, I would say teenage years, college years, where it was like, okay, how can I leverage this to get what I want?
Yes.
Whether that be relationships, whether that be friends, whether that be status, or whatever it might be. And I think we see so much of that in the world these days. Is we see a lot of beautiful women, but they're not leveraging it to point people to Jesus. And so now it's like my relationship with beauty has vastly changed to where it's like, okay, if someone is going to look at me for one more second, like how can I point them to Jesus?
Yeah, you said that to me in a text the other day, and I thought that was so powerful because we see it plainly laid out in the Book of Esther, where it's because of her beauty that the Lord gave her a platform. And so I want to talk about the world looks at beauty in one way. Like it's very like beauty is like put on a pedestal, right? Like everybody wants to be beautiful. Everybody wants, it's like a status. It's a power grab. And we are all chasing some form of beauty. But when you look at it in the church, like in church culture, it's like, it's actually so frowned upon. It's looked down upon. It is something that like, you don't want to be, you almost want to hide. You don't want to stand out. So how is that for you? How is that for you? Like, how was being a part of the church, because you grew up in the church. How did that, what am I trying to ask? Like, how did that shape you? Yeah. And even just like change your perspective on beauty even.
That's such a good question. I feel like, growing up in the church and beauty being something that was frowned upon, it's almost like you want to hide it. You always want to downplay yourself. I always, especially like junior high school, I always wanted to dress like trendy in a certain way, but I feel like I had to be someone different at church. And that was a struggle I think I carried into adulthood because, even during the years when I wasn't necessarily closely walking with Jesus, I always felt this like push and pull, like, okay, I want to know Jesus, but I don't feel like I can show up as my real self at church.
Well, because it's like you think of it through the lens of vanity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't want to be vain.
Yes. Yeah. And still to this day, like I just said, it's an attention that feels uncomfortable, regardless of wherever you are, but especially in a church setting. And I think it's uncomfortable too, when you have males at church that look at you a certain way, and it's like, okay, you kind of expect that, out in the world, but in the church, it's just really just cringe.
Yes. Yes. It is a hard thing to navigate. So what has the Book of Esther taught you as this word has been spoken over you, and as you've really come into this relationship with the Lord where it's more than just showing up to church on Sundays or, even opening your Bible, but it's actually become like this thing that you're obsessed with, like in the best way. How is that this word being spoken over you and knowing the Book of Esther and knowing her story shaped your ministry, moving forward?
Yeah. So I think the Book of Esther was probably the first book where I realized that beauty is such a gift. And I'm not just speaking for myself, but when I see other women, also women that are raising daughters and even my own daughter, I'm like, okay, you can see that gift that that God gives us of beauty and how he uses it throughout the Bible. And Esther's not the only book. Sorry guys, I'm not super prepared for this podcast, but Abigail is another one. Do you know that story, Tessa?
Not like off the top of my head.
Okay, well, she was married, I hope I get this right, married to a man named Nabal, I think. And basically, oh gosh, I really hope I get this right. King David, I think, is traveling along, and Abigail's beauty like stops him in his tracks, and she uses her beauty to defend her husband, who's unworthy of really being defended. He's like a terrible man. But anyway, so Nabal ends up dying, and it can't be David. I don't know who it was, but whoever it was ends up marrying Abigail.
Okay.
So that's another one.
Yes, it was David.
Was it David?
Yes.
Okay, so he marries Abigail.
Yes.
Okay.
Abigail?
Is it Abigail? Okay.
This is coming back.
Okay.
But yes, she's beautiful.
She's
and
beautiful,
She does get married. Her husband dies or something,
he dies,
and she gets married to David.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh. Okay. Good. We got that right. But that was another story that I was like, wow, God's gift of beauty is so powerful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even they talk about like Saul and David as being really handsome men.
Yep.
And so it's not just women.
Yes.
I mean, it's
certain people.
I mean, it's a lot of the leaders that you see throughout the Bible.
Yes. And there was a verse, gosh, I wish I wrote it down in my journal. I want to say it's in Hebrews, but how Jesus did not have that gift. And it said something like along the lines of he was not one to be desired.
He was just kind of a plain, ordinary guy.
And I really meditated on that verse. And I was like, wow, like Jesus, you didn't have this gift, so to speak, of appearance. But, in God's goodness, he gives us gifts that even he didn't necessarily, extend to Jesus, which is crazy. So I was like, just taken back like that. And then I started thinking, gosh, what did Jesus look like? Like in 2024, what would Jesus look like?
I know.
And would we pay any attention to him?
I recently just watched Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
Well, and I've been watching The Chosen. So, the same guy that plays Jesus in The Chosen plays the Lonnie Frisbee in the Jesus Revolution movie. And so now when I think about Jesus, I think about this guy. What is his name? I can't remember it, whatever his real name is. But I just think that was the perfect character to pick to play Jesus, because, he isn't the most desirable looking person, but then there are parts of him that you're like, oh, like he's got like a gentleness about him, or there's like, his eyes are so pretty, or like he's got a great smile, or like great laugh. And so those all add to appearance somehow. You know what I mean? Like when you get to know somebody, I always find it really interesting when you are hanging out with somebody or just meeting somebody for the first time, and you're like, their appearance maybe doesn't stand out to you as a first impression type of thing. And then you get to know them and you're like, this is maybe one of the most beautiful people I've met. And then all of a sudden, like, you notice their eyes and how like captivating their eyes are. You notice how like defined their cheekbones are. And it's like who they are as a person makes them stand out in beauty in their features. Do you know what I mean?
Yep, I totally agree. Yep, I agree. Another point I was going to make is that at that retreat, on the flip side of being, of having that Esther word spoken over me, there was a lady at the retreat, and she was so sweet but honest. And when we went around the circle, she actually said that she didn't know me at all, but she wasn't going to come on the retreat after seeing that I was coming.
Yeah.
And she was like, I just felt like I can't show up to this retreat if like Nicole's going to be there and she looks this way or dresses this way. And she's like, and I just feel really insecure.
So let me ask you, how did that make you feel?
That just like broke my heart, because I'm like, all the times, and I've felt like she has too about other people, and I'm like, I hate that the enemy uses that lie to separate us as women. Yeah. And thankfully, after the retreat, we're friends and connected, and it was a beautiful time together. But I think it's hard, especially for women, to see past the exterior, to want to get to know people's heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember like, for me growing up, like in the church and things, like just feeling as though in my own way, because of the way, comments that were made about my appearance and even my sisters. I mean, gosh, my sisters are beautiful. My mom is beautiful. And that was kind of always this thing that was said. It was like, oh, you have such a beautiful family. And I remember thinking that we have to, this is not going to be the right phrasing, but kind of dumb ourselves down in order to hide certain aspects of ourselves so we don't stand out in any way. And so recently, I had a friend of mine, I had posted a story on Instagram, where I had just received this new red sweater, and I posted it on Instagram, and I posted it, and I was like, in my story, I was like, I never wear red because it's such a bold color, but it happens like whenever I wear it, people are always like, oh my gosh, that's your color, Tessa. And so my friend, after I posted that story, was like, why don't you ever wear the color red? And I'm just like, well, I don't want to stand out. Like, I don't want to stand out. It's a really bold color choice, and I feel like it makes me be noticed more than I want to be noticed. And she's like, well, why don't you want to be noticed? And I'm like, well, that's a great question. Why don't I want to be noticed? And then it took me back to just growing up, and it was this unspoken rule or unspoken expectation of like, in order to be a Christ follower and to be like a humble follower of Jesus, you needed to be humble in appearance as well. And so don't stand out. Don't care too much about what you look like or how you dress or any of that. But for me, I love that expression of beauty. I loved, being able to dress myself up and accentuate certain features, or just because I thought it was beautiful and I appreciated the beauty of a pair of earrings or a necklace or how an outfit always pulled together. And yet whenever I would go somewhere, it was always like, oh wow, you're really dressed up, Tessa. And I'd always be like, I really just threw this dress on and I paired it with some earrings and I called it a day. Like, I didn't do anything extra, but there would always be comments, and I'm sure you can relate to that. Like, there's always comments that are made that make you feel like, oh, I've got to diminish myself in my appearance to make other people comfortable.
Yes, I definitely feel that. And I think too, who you surround yourself with can blanking on one. Okay. Who you surround yourself with can really exacerbate that feeling.
Yeah.
And I feel like, in the past I've had friends that I knew felt uncomfortable, like if I was complimented, and I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is just kind of an uncomfortable thing when you're in a group and everybody's listening and they're like pointing you out, right? Yeah. So I can totally relate to that feeling of not wanting to be noticed, not wanting to stand out, yes. Downplaying myself. Actually, I think you and I have a similar style, and I don't think all of it's necessarily because we don't want to stand out, but we're very like elevated basics, yeah. Where yes. It's like we're not over the top, even if we probably wanted to be over the top, because it just feels uncomfortable.
Like too much.
It's like
you're already you're accentuating something, or I don't know. There's some things I need to work out there with the Lord, I think, because after I had that conversation with that friend of mine that asked me all these questions, I was like, oh man, like there are definitely some lies that I'm believing about myself and that I'm believing about the idea of beauty. And it's like I said, beauty's not always even in the appearance. I mean, it's in other things too. And God obviously, like, He loves beauty. I mean, you look at His creation, everything is beautiful. I mean, He has dressed the flowers in the fields, and I mean, even just the mountaintops. I mean, He loves creating beauty. And so, and not to say that we need to put beauty on a pedestal, but I think our heart behind wanting to do an episode on this topic was to bring awareness to the fact that beauty isn't bad. Right. And God wants to use beauty. Yes. And it's not to be vain. It's not to be used for, worldly success or even worldly status, but more so that, like Esther, the Lord has a plan for you. And he oftentimes will use beauty as a way to put you in front of people, right?
So good, yep.
And to place you in an opportunity or a position to speak into existence, things that he wants to speak, right? And so it's,
Nope, I would totally agree with that. And I think, beauty is unearned, undeserved. It's just by the grace of God that he's given us this gift. And so I am in total agreement with you, Tessa. Beauty can feel super uncomfortable in the church, and it's super elevated outside of the church.
Yes.
And so just as Christian women, knowing that we have beauty, all of us in some way or another, and B, figuring out how to use it to glorify God in all that we do, whether that be in business, out and about. If someone stops you at a grocery store and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful, and in extending that kindness, reciprocating it back to them in the best way that we know how, that will point them to Jesus. And I'm like, I think a lot of that beauty that we carry is the Holy Spirit inside of us. It's that like Jesus glow, and it's like, okay, she's pretty, but like there's something even more different about her. And I just want to know like what that is. And like you said, even with Jesus, if we met him today, maybe he wouldn't be the most attractive man according to the world's standards, but there would be something about him that we're like drawn to. And so that's really my goal now is like, I'm aging. Beauty for me is not.
You're not aging. There's not a wrinkle.
Yes. But, this gift isn't forever. My body, is diminishing, but in all the ways. But I am like, okay, God, as long as you give me this gift to where other people are seeing beauty, then let me use it for your good and your glory. And now that I'm raising a daughter, teaching her how to do the same thing. And one thing I wanted to touch on too is that you said, in the church, which I can so relate, how people are like, your family's so beautiful. I mean, we even get that today. I think your family too. And so I tried to not lead with physical looks when I compliment Oakley.
Oh, that's good.
So I think that was the one thing I remember standing out for me as a little girl growing up, is just like, you're so pretty, like you're so cute, but it was never like, you're so smart. Like, I see Jesus in you because you are so forgiving. And so I'm like, okay, how can I
make it a looks focused compliment?
And how can she lead with these Jesus characteristics, not her physical looks?
That's so good. And I mean, even such a reminder to me too of just like, how can I point out the heart of my children and the Jesus in them, to make them proud of that, and not strive for something else, not strive for what the world wants them to strive for.
Because whatever people are telling us, which the world is going to tell them way more than we are about kind of the things that matter in the world. And then that's going to become just like it did for me, which I pray against for them, but what it could become as their identity, and what they long, like you said, to strive for and become is more beautiful, more athletic, more whatever. But it's like, so, our voice as moms in the home and parents in the home has to be the characteristics of Jesus first and foremost.
So good.
And
I think a great place to
wrap it up.
Well, this was great. Great episode, and it's good to just sit down with you and chit chat.
I love you, girl.
I love you too.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to today's podcast, and we will be back again next week. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.